Programming a video game is hard. Like, honestly, it's really freaking hard. But in the end, when you finally come up with something that you're happy with, there's no better feeling than being able to share this game with your family and friends. If you want others to visit a URL and play your game, you're going to need two things. The first being a server, and the second being a domain name. These will get your game up and running on the web, but the catch is, well, they cost money. In the past, I've shown how to deploy games using serverless providers like Netlify and GitHub Pages, but if you want to keep your code private, you have to fork out a decent sum of money, at least a little bit more than what we're going to be using. And that's a great reason as to exactly why I'm making this video in the first place, to show you how to host your games for as cheap as possible, while still using a fast and reliable server. To do this, we're going to use the server provider Linode, who also happens to be today's sponsor. Linode will allow us to create a server in the cloud for less than 1 cent per hour. Their plans also have monthly caps built in, so the most you'll ever pay for their smallest Nanode plan is $5 a month, which is absolutely absurd for the speed and power we're about to get. You can also just delete your server at any time, and all 1 cent per hour charges will cease immediately. And to make it even better, you get $100 to use however you'd like for the first 60 days. No contracts, hidden charges, or weird BS required. Truly, I can say this from personal experience, you're really not going to get a better deal than this to host all of your sites and just do so much more in the future. So use the link in the description to sign up, log in, and we'll hop right into hosting our games. So once you log in, we're going to be greeted with a dashboard that looks like this. We're going to click on Create Linode, which basically just means we're going to create a server. Next, we're going to choose a distribution. What kind of operating system do we want to put on this server? Well, I know I want to scroll down and select an Ubuntu 22.04 LTS. This is a very common Linux distribution, so I'm going to use that. And then I need to select a region. Where do I want this server placed within the world? I'm going to choose a server that's close to me, which is Atlanta, Georgia. And then I'm going to scroll on down to Linode Plan. Then I'll click on the Shared CPU tab and click the very first option, which is a Nanode 1GB server. You'll see this only costs $5 a month, which equates to less than 1 cent per hour, which is absolutely absurd for what we're getting here. We're getting 1 GB of RAM, 25 GB of storage, and we're going to be able to host all of our sites on this one simple server. So an amazing deal from Linode, which is honestly why I think they're so great. Let's keep on scrolling down, and we can either keep the name that they've given us right here for the server, or we can change it. I'm going to change this to game-server, and then I need to enter a root password for the server. What's going to allow us to log into this? I'll enter in my password, and then scroll on down to the very bottom until we can click on Create Linode. So while that spins up our server, you'll see that Linode has given us a few things here, including an IP address. So this string of characters right here is what we can visit to view our server live on the web. You'll see if I copy this and open up a new tab and paste that on in. If I try visiting this, we're not actually going to see anything by default. One, probably because this is still being provisioned, and there it goes, it's ready now, but we're not going to see anything just yet because this server is not set up to handle HTTP requests. Until it is set up to handle those, we're just going to see a blank screen like this, but what we need to do is install a web server program on this new Linode server that we just created within Linode. And in order to do that, we need to log into that server using a terminal or command prompt. And to log into that server, we can use this command right here, sshroot at our IP address. So I'll go ahead and copy this, and then I want to open up a terminal window. Looks a little something like this. So if you're brand new to terminal, do not be frightened. What we see right here is just a way to navigate through our computer. Here's how I like thinking of it. If I were to open up my home directory within Finder, which is Christopher Liss, and scroll on down to my non-hidden folders, you'll see that I have things such as applications, Creative Cloud Files, desktop, etc. Now, if I were to ls, which means list out the contents of this directory I'm currently in, and this current directory is indicated by the squiggly, if I type ls to list everything out, you're going to notice that these directories are a one-to-one representation of what we see over in Finder. We have applications, we have Creative Cloud Files, we have desktop, documents, etc., and everything is also over here within Finder. So really, when we're using terminal, all we're doing is navigating through our main operating system, but we're able to run specific commands that edit our files. And the first command we're going to run within terminal is the command to log in to another terminal which exists over in Georgia, at least for me, because that is where I specified I want my Linode server to be. So what was that command that we want to run? If we ever forget, we'd head back to our browser, and then copy that command for SSH access. I'm going to copy that, head back to terminal, and paste it on in. So if I hit enter right now, it's going to ask me, is this host computer which I'm trying to log in from something that I can trust? And in this case, I definitely want to type yes, and then enter. And now I just need to add the password that I added when we were creating our Linode server. So I'll add that in. So if you're not prompted with something that says invalid password and you see what I'm seeing right here, this means you are now logged into your Linode server no matter where it is within the world. And I can type ls to see the contents of our home folder indicated by squiggly. Nothing is in here just yet, but this is the first thing that we need to do in order to get our games running on the web, specifically on that Linode IP address. So next we're going to run the following command, apt update. So apt is Ubuntu's package manager. It is very similar to npm and JavaScript. But in this case, we want to make sure that all of our packages that exist on this Ubuntu server are completely up to date, and we can't do that until we run apt update. But once we run apt update, now we can begin installing what we need to get our site running. And what we're going to install is called Nginx. This is a web server, very similar to Apache, and basically all this is a program which will host our files so that others can come and visit our site and then view these files and play our game. So to install Nginx, I'll run apt install, and this is just like npm install. We're going to install Nginx, it's spelled like that, Nginx. And we'll hit enter, and now that is going to install as long as we hit Y right here. We're just confirming that we do indeed want to install 8,000 kilobytes worth of space. That is how large the app is, and as long as we hit enter, you're going to see that this begins installing, and eventually it will complete. There it goes, and as soon as this completes, we're going to be able to visit that IP address to see an index.html file served up to us now. So let's go back to our browser. And then I'll open up that tab in which an error occurred. This was the IP address associated with our Linode server, but we couldn't visit it before because no web server was installed on that server. We were not accepting requests from port 80. So if I hit enter now that we've installed Nginx, you're going to see that we are served up an index.html page specifically from Nginx. And it's really that simple to get something running on your own server. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that our game is running right here instead of this blank welcome page. So how do we go about that? Well, let's find out where this page is being run within our server in the first place. I'll head back to terminal, and then I want to cd, which stands for change directory. Basically, this allows us to navigate through our operating system, but within a terminal. I want to change our directory to the root directory of our server, which I can do by adding in a slash. If I cd slash, now I'm within the root directory, and I want to cd into a folder called var. So I'll cd into var, and then I want to continue cding into www. So I'll cd into var www, hit enter, and then type ls to list out the contents of this directory. I list that out. There is one directory in here called html. Can you guess what is within this directory? Well, let's go inside with cd, html, ls, and inside of here is an HTML file. If I log out the contents of this file right here, you're going to see that this is an HTML file that exactly represents what we saw in the browser right here. So when we visit our page right here, we're serving up this index.html file within this directory of var/www/html. So really, we just need to get our game into this directory right here, and we should be able to play it whenever we visit our IP address. Now, how do we get our game pushed up to this server? Well, it's a little tricky, but it's not too hard, I promise. So I'm going to open up a new tab within terminal by clicking Command T. And when we open up a new tab, we're no longer in our server somewhere out there in the world. We're within our own local computer, the computer that we're currently using. If I ls list out the contents of wherever we are within this new tab, you're going to see that these were all the directories that we had prior within my Finder window. So I'll side by side these to make it a little easier to see. We are currently back within my home directory. Now from our local terminal, I want to run a command called scp. This stands for secure copy. Basically, we're going to copy all the contents of our game directory and paste them over on in within our server directory. So the first thing we're going to put right here is a -r. This stands for recursive. This means we want to grab all of the contents of whatever directory we specify to copy them over. The next thing we're going to write is what directory do we want to run this command from? Well, we need to find out wherever our game is located within our actual operating system, locally that is. So I know the game that I want to use here is within my web directory, and I want to use the fighting game from the fighting game tutorial that I did earlier. So I want to go inside of this one specific directory right here that I have within Finder. Let me go ahead and get rid of this scp command first. I'll do a cd, and then I can just grab the fighting game directory and drag it on top of the CD. And that's automatically going to give me the path in which this fighting game directory is located. So now I can just hit enter, and I'm inside of our fighting game directory. Really cool stuff right there. But I do want to go one directory back, so I'm within the web directory that contains the fighting game directory. And to go one back, we can type cd change directory ... We're going back one directory, hit enter, and now we're within web. Perfect. This is exactly where we want to be. If I run a quick ls, you're going to see our fighting game is available to us. Perfect. So now we can really run scp-r recursive and specify the path in which we want to copy files from. It's going to be fighting-game / because we want all the files within this directory of fighting game. That is going to be the first argument after our -r option. Next, we're going to type a space and specify where we want to paste these files into. So I want to paste these into our remote server, and to paste these into the remote server, I need to type root at the IP address associated with our Linode server. I already forgot what that was, and if we ever forget, we can just go back to Linode over here in this tab, and then copy our IP address. So I'll grab that, I'll open up our terminal once more, and then paste in that IP address. Perfect. So I'm going to full screen this so we can see this all within one line. And now all I need to do is specify the directory within our Linode server of where we want to push this fighting game to. So I can specify that with a colon, and then from the root of our Linode directory, I know this is within var/www/html. And as long as everything right here is set out correctly, you're going to see everything is copied from fighting game over to our Linode server. So let's hit enter. It's going to ask us for our password. Hopefully I type it in correctly this time. We'll see. And it is good to go. Everything is currently being copied and pasted into our Linode server. So let's go back to our other tab in which we're actually logged into that server. So I'll click this tab right here. And now if I ls from this HTML directory in which we pasted everything into, list out the contents, you're going to see all of our files are now copied over. But we do have two index.htmls competing with each other. We have our fighting game index.html, and we also have this default index.html that Nginx provided for us. Let's get rid of the default by typing rm remove index.nginx-debian.html. That's going to get rid of that, and now only our game is currently within this HTML directory. So now if we visit our IP address, we should be able to see our fighting game. Let's check it out. We'll go over to min, go back to our tab with our IP address, double check that right there, and then hit enter. And there is our fighting game live on the web. Anyone can visit this, they can visit on their phone, another computer. As long as they're connected to the internet, they're going to be able to play the game that you put up here. But we really shouldn't end it at this. We should change this IP address to a domain name. People are not going to remember your IP addresses, but they will remember some sort of catchy domain name in which they can come and play your game. So if I were to recommend a good domain registrar to buy a domain name from, I would recommend domains.google. And if we type that on in, you're going to be greeted with Google Domains homepage. So the next thing you need to do is either sign up for a Google account or sign in with an existing one. And once you're signed in, you can see that these are all the domains associated with my Google account. Now, I want to get a new domain, so I'm going to go to the left and click Get a New Domain. And here I can search for wherever I want my game to be hosted. So I think a good name for this will be chriscourses.games. I really like that. It makes complete sense for what I'm trying to do here. And you'll see this is indeed available to me, as indicated by the check mark. And it is only $20 a year. That is still really, really cheap. But if you want to go even cheaper, if I scroll down, you can see there are options for $12 a year. That equates to, I don't know, something like less than 0.0005 cents an hour or something ridiculous like that. But this is the domain that I currently want to add for this new Linode server. So I'm going to add this to my cart. And once that's been added, I can visit my cart and run through the quick checkout process. So I only want this for a year. I want privacy protection, which means no one knows that I personally own this domain, even though everyone here knows. And then I want auto renew on, meaning that once this year runs up, this is going to auto renew meaning that I still own the domain. No one else can take it over. I don't really care about a Google Workspace. This is something you'd use if you want a specific email, but I don't. So I'm just going to check out for $20. And given your checkout was successful, you should be greeted with a screen like this. So really the only thing we need to focus on right now is going to be DNS, stands for Domain Name System. And here we can specify when someone visits our domain, chriscourses.games, where do we want to redirect them to? What server should they be visiting? Well, we can do this by creating a record, and the type is going to be an A record. So when we create an A record, we just need to insert an IP address that says this domain is going to be pointed at this IP address. When we visit this domain, we should present the results as if we're visiting this specific IP address. So what is our IP address again? We can go back to Linode, grab that IP address right here, and then paste it in as our A record. We don't need to worry about anything else. Now we just need to hit save, and we have our A record in place. So now when I visit chriscourses.games, we should actually be visiting this IP address. We should be seeing our game. Let's visit our IP address and visit chriscourses.games. We'll hit enter, and our game is here now live on chriscourses.games. How cool is that? One thing I do want to note is it might take a couple of minutes for your game to be available at your domain name of choice. You'll see right here, Google even says, these DNS settings are active, changes are published immediately, but might take time to propagate. Typically it takes around 5 to 10 to 15 minutes for these changes to actually show. Sometimes it's immediately, but just give it a little bit of time and you should be able to visit your game at your destination URL. Now you can send this URL to all your friends, family, whoever you want to send your game to, but I do want to show you how to host the rest of your games on this URL as well. Maybe something like a subdomain such as pokemon.chriscourses.games instead. So back within Google Domains, I'm going to create a new record by clicking Manage Custom Records. And then here they have a Create New Record button. I'm going to click that. And then for host name, I'm going to type in Pokemon, because I know I want my Pokemon style game to be served whenever someone visits this URL, pokemon.chriscourses.games. What type of record should this be? Well, simply an A record. And where do we want to point it to? Well, the same IP address that we used prior. I'll paste that on in, hit save, and let's see what happens when I visit pokemon.chriscourses.games. I'll copy this, go to our separate tab, paste it on in, and we're going to see the exact same thing that we have for our fighting game. And that is okay, but we need to tell our server that we want to serve up a different set of files whenever we visit this URL right here. And to do that, we need to go back into our terminal. So right now we're currently within var www.html. If I list out the contents, this is our fighting game. Let's change our directory to one below. And now we have our fighting game, which is actually HTML. We want to copy into var www our Pokemon game directory instead. So how do we go about doing that? Well, let's open up our other terminal tab that we have right here. This is our local terminal, remember. If I ls within our web folder, you're going to see that we have all these different games available to us. I want our Pokemon style game to be transferred over. And if I want to use that same command of SCP that we had earlier, but I can't really remember it off the top of my head, I can use our arrow keys on the keyboard and press up. And it's going to give us all the previous commands that we used. So you'll see right here, this was the SCP command that we used to copy all of our game contents over to our server. I want to edit this slightly, but not too much. To edit this, I'm going to use our other arrow keys of left and right to start moving our cursor over to where fighting game is. And I want to replace fighting game with Pokemon style game instead. We want all the contents within this directory, and we want to paste it on over en route at our IP address. In what directory? Well, not our HTML directory, that is our default of the fighting game. We want to paste this within a Pokemon directory instead. So I'm going to type pokemon.chriscourses.games, because that is representative of the URL we're going to be visiting to serve up these files. Now this directory doesn't actually exist within our server because we haven't created it yet. To create this directory, we'll go one tab over, and back within var www within our Linode server, we'll type mkdir, it stands for make directory. Space, what directory do we want to make? Well, the one we just specified within our command, that's going to be pokemon.chriscourses.games. So as long as we make this, and ls, you'll see this directory is now available to us. We should be able to paste all the contents directly in here. Let's go back to our other tab and then run this whole command. I'll hit enter. And then I just need to type in my password one more time. And you'll see no such file or directory, which just means I made a mistake in spelling. So I know right here I spelled Chris Courses wrong. I need to make sure that I fix this so that directory actually exists. So I'll move my cursor to try to run this command again. Spell courses correctly. Hit enter. Enter my password one last time. And that's going to start moving all of my files over to our Linode server directly within that directory we specified. So if I go back to our server, ls, we list out pokemon.chriscourse.games. I can cd inside of there, and ls one more time, and we can see all those files are now available to us. So now, if I visit within the browser, pokemon.chriscourse.games, are we going to show the Pokemon game instead? Let me refresh, and no, we're still not. We're still serving up the default of our fighting game. So we need to specify what happens when we visit Pokemon instead of just chriscourses.games to serve up the correct directory. And to do that, we're going to need to edit our Nginx config a little bit. So to edit our config, we're going to go back to our Linode terminal, and I want to cd into our root, which is cd/. When I'm inside of here, I can list out the contents with ls. I want to go inside of this right here, Etsy. I go inside of Etsy, ls. That's a lot of stuff, but I know where I want to go. It's going to be Nginx. And once we're inside of our Nginx folder, it looks a little something like this. So right now, our fighting game is being hosted within sites available. If I go inside of there and list things out, we have a default configuration, and I can use cat to output the contents of that. This is what it looks like, but really, all you really need to know right here is the default of our root is whatever index.html is within this right here, var www.html. We basically need to edit this a bit to say what happens when we serve up our Pokemon game instead. So I'm going to clear this out with Control L, and then I want to cd back into our Nginx directory. I'll type ls to list things out. I want to head inside of conf.d. This is going to be our configuration directory. So I go inside of there. There's nothing currently in here. I want to create a new configuration file, which I can do with touch. This just means create a new file, and what do we want to call this? Well, I'm going to call this pokemon.chriscourses.games.conf configuration. I'll hit enter on that, type ls, and now we have a blank file in which we can edit. So if we want to edit a file on terminal, we can use a default nano command, which is basically a terminal-like editor. So if we type nano, and then the name of the file we want to edit, so Pokemon chriscourses.games.conf, it's going to send us into something that looks like this. And you'll see I can type inside of here no problem, but we want to type in a very specific set of terms that Nginx can understand. So this will be available within the video description if you just want to copy and paste things, but it's going to look a little something like this. I'm going to type server, and then an opening, and closing curly bracket. This is a server block in which we can indicate what happens when we visit our Pokemon URL instead of our fighting game URL. And if I want to go up to type inside of these brackets, I can use our arrow keys. So I'll hit up on the arrow key, and then tab to space things out a bit. Now the very first thing we want to specify right here is going to be a port number. And I can do that by typing listen for port 80, and then add a semicolon. And a port number is just a number specification of what app is running. So by default, when you open up a browser and you visit some sort of URL, a port number is added onto the end of this. And when you visit a normal URL like this, the port number that's added onto it is 80. You'll see if I visit this with :80, that is our port number, hit enter, things still work, and we're redirected to our root URL. But if I were to try something else, like a port number of 3000, well, nothing is running on that port within our server, so we just don't see anything. But by default, Nginx runs on port 80, so when we visit that, we can still see our game and so forth. So when someone visits our URL, we're listening on port 80, we want to also add in a server_name option, which is going to be the domain name we want to listen for port 80 requests for. That domain name is going to be pokemon.chriscourses.games. This is exactly what we specified within Google Domains, and you can see this is the name of our configuration file as well. Let's add a semicolon, and we're good there for the server name. Next, when someone visits this URL on port 80, what root document should we be serving up? Well, we know our Pokemon game is within var/www.pokemon.chriscourses. .games, and that's going to host out the first index.html file within that directory. But we do want to specify, to be extra explicit, what the index.html file is called. In our case, it is called index.html. And then we add a semicolon. That's pretty much all we need to make sure that our Pokemon game is going to show. So let's exit out of Nano. To exit out of this, we need to hit Control X. So I'll hit that on my keyboard. And then do we want to save this new file? Yes. So I'll hit Y. And then what do we want to call this file? Well, just the same exact thing. So I'll hit Enter here. And now, if I display the contents of that file, you're going to see that it is saved with all of our new code. So by default, this will not work. We need to make sure that we restart Nginx for these changes to take effect. So the first thing we do before restarting Nginx always is type in nginx-t. This tests all of our configuration files to make sure that they are written correctly, because if you have anything wrong within these configuration files, well, your site is going to break. So we'll type nginx.t to check for us before restarting. Everything looks to be okay. The test is successful. So now all we need to do is write nginx-s. We're going to send a signal to Nginx to reload the configurations. So if we type that in, hit enter, everything seems to be good. And now when we visit our URL, we should be serving up our Pokemon game instead of our fighting game. So let's go back to our browser. Make sure that we are visiting pokemon.chriscourses.games, which we are. And now when I hit enter, you're going to see that our Pokemon game is served up instead. Now I know it says an error occurred over here, but that is just caching due to the Mint browser. But if I go back and visit chriscourses.games, where our fighting game is living, the fighting game is served up instead. So now we have two locations in which we can host our games, on chriscourses.games and also pokemon.chriscourses.games. And you can do this for as many games as your server can handle. Really, the only time you want to begin upgrading your server is if you're getting a lot of hits of people coming in, and the server just ends up breaking because it can't handle how many people are coming in. But I have yet to have that on chriscourses.com, and that also is about a $5 to $10 server. So my recommendation would be stick with the $5 servers for as long as you can, and then pretty much only upgrade until you see the need to scale your game. But that is going to be how you can begin hosting games on legit URLs like this and host all of your games at the same time so you're getting the best bang for your buck. Now, if you don't have a game to host, make sure that you watch this video up next. It's going to teach you everything you need to know to develop your very first video game.